Well, here we are. We're going to do the review of issue 61, the magazine. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we kind of discussed before, the Umbaran Starfighter is the first thing we're going to talk about. Manufacturer was Umbrians. Obviously, the class is a Starfighter. Its length is 10.38 meters, and its height is 12.47 meters. Space frame is flexible frame with a ray-shielded cockpit. Armament is a chin-mounted plasma cannon and 2 wing-mounted missile pods, and had a single pilot for a crew. The Imperial Starfighter was unlike any other. The designers who developed it did not appear to have been influenced by any of the many different starship technologies developed anywhere in the galaxy. Almost the only conventional element was the slim, curvaceous space frame around the engines, which were mounted in vertical arrangement with 3 exhaust vents. Above the body, 2 angled fins were the only other concession to normal engineering. And if you can see that, looks pretty strange. So you get another look at it here, and that's an Umbaran. Nowhere was the departure from the norm more obvious than the cockpit, as the ship didn't have one in any conventional sense. The pilot sat in an upright command seat that rested on the ground when the ship was not in use, and a repulsor lift brought the seat up to its flight position at the front of the ship, with merely a forward loop of the space frame to locate it. The only separation between the cockpit and the elements or enemy fire was a scintillating blue energy bubble, which was ray shielded to offer the pilot a limited degree of protection. Wing geometry. Let's talk about that real quick before we move on. Umbrian fighter's elegant space frame had a variable geometry. The craft's ribbon-like wings twisted around the central housing for the cockpit and engine block. In a normal flight, they adopted to roughly triangular shape. When the ship landed, the wings settled into a rest position, allowing the fighter to stand on its wingtips or be stored in racks around the walls of its hangars. When the ship lifted off, the wings shifted down into flight configuration. Pretty cool. Holographics control. This is another cool thing. An Umbrian starship's controls were unlike almost every other starship ever designed. In place of physical levers or switches, the craft was controlled through a holographic interface that surrounded the pilot's hands and sensed the pilot's hand gestures. The interface was sensitive and not always intuitive, so beginners could find it difficult to use. When clone pilot Hardcase commandeered an Umbrian starfighter during the Clone Wars, he crashed it several times before mastering it. Control system. The cockpit instruments and controls were equally unusual. The two blue holographic spheres formed around the pilot's hands when they took control. There were no traditional lever or foot pedal controls. Instead, every subtle hand gesture that the pilot made influenced the ship, which could be very disconcerting for anyone trained to fly conventional craft. The militia for whom the ships were built grew up with this system, but a steady hand was essential for anyone else trying to fly an Umbrian starfighter. The flight pattern was also unique compared to other starfighters, which need to bank into turns, especially when maneuvering in an atmosphere. The Umbrian ships could change orientation on the spot, effectively coming to a stop, rotating, darting off in a different direction. Part of this ability was due to the wings, 2 ribbon-like loops attached to the central body of the ship and twisted into vaguely triangular shape. While not particularly fast, the Umbrian starfighters were responsive and eerily quiet, which lent them the element of surprise. Their agility made up for their light shielding. The cockpit shields in particular were weak enough to be brought down by accurate small arms fire. The vessel had no hyperdrive, as they were used in local operation. Weaponry. Umbrian starfighters were armed with 2 weapon systems. Below the command chair was a single rapid discharge cannon that fired powerful green laser bolts. By default, the fire control was key to the pilot's clenching and unclenching his right hand in a special gesture that was all too easily replicated by the unwary or inexperienced pilot. The secondary weapon system was a pair of electromagnetic pulse missile launchers mounted on the lower arms of the wings. By default, these devastating weapons were fired by punching a fist. Alternatively, if the control option was reconfigured, pushing an open hand forward would launch the lethal missiles. Like the command seat, the pulse missile launchers were independent modules with built-in repulsor lift systems. This allowed the weapons to be handled easily by a single Umbrian technician. The launchers were linked to the controls of their designated fighter so they could be maneuvered into position by the pilot and then locked in place magnetically. Turning the tables, when Umbra threw in its lot with the Separatists during the Clone Wars, Republic forces were drawn into a fight on the Shadow World. After a huge air-to-ground assault, the clone troops who led the invasion soon learned to respect the destructive power of the Umbrian Starfighter. A turning point in the battle came with the capture of the Umbrian air base, thanks in part to clone troopers commandeering Umbrian ships to use as an assault support. Oh, as air support. Sorry. Gee, Christmas. To prevent further weapons and equipment reaching the Umbrian militia, clone troopers Fives, Hardcase, and Jesse then launched an attack using the stolen Umbrian starfighters to infiltrate and destroy the Separatist supply ship from the inside, although Hardcase lost his life in the action. So that would have been them there flying in to do their deed. Umbrian A to Z, behind the scenes. Concept artist Chris Glenn developed an entire Umbrian alphabet for use in the Clone Wars. All 27 letters were based on circles, a recurring theme of Umbrian design as seen in the spherical cockpit of the Starfighter. So here you get to see all the different letters and whatnot of their alphabet. And so it's kind of weird because it goes all the way down to Z, and then these 4 aren't labeled, so I don't know what these are, but then it starts at 1 through 0, and then whatever these are, and these are special characters here. So I'm not sure what those are, but rather interesting, I think. Okay, Galactic Time and Dates. So this one was kind of interesting, so I'm not going to go through everything. Just know that basically one of the main reasons why they needed to kind of come up with a universal time and date is because of traveling through hyperspace. The invention of the hyperspace allowed a ship and its passengers to bypass relativity to prevent theoretical side effects of traveling faster than light, which is known as time dilation. While in hyperspace, the ship's stasis field keeps everything within time with a standard galactic dimension. So far as occupants are concerned, time passes equally at all locations on the journey, and they will arrive at their destination the same period later as they have experienced in ship time. This means that as soon as travel and trade began to spread around the galaxy, it became important for spacers to agree on a universal system for recording the dates and times of events. And under the Old Republic, what would become the common standard for measuring time across a galaxy. The Galactic Standard Calendar is a lunisolar system based on natural periods derived from observing orbital cycles of Coruscant, the capital. So basically, the time standard came from Coruscant, and because of that, that's how it worked. So here are their days. You have Prime Day. It's the first day of the week named for Coruscant's sun. You have Syntax Day, named after Coruscant's primary moon. Tongue's Day, named after the old tongue species of Coruscant. Zell Day, believed named after the Zell species of Coruscant, and Bindu Day, named after Coruscant's Bindu monks. So they only have 5-day weeks. So that's kind of interesting. Um, Essentially, it kind of goes through a lot of this stuff, and it starts talking about um, different eras and whatever. And so you have BBY, which is before the Battle of Yavin. Those after it are ABY for after Battle of Yavin. Dates classed as 0BBY or 0ABY. Both denote events that happen in the same year as the battle, either in the months before or the months after it. So just like normal, 100 years equals a millennia, and 1,000 years, or oh, sorry, centuries are 100 years, and a millennia is 1,000 years. So just like what we experience, um, accurate timekeeping is based on dividing the duration of Coruscant's day into 24 standard hours, each of which is further split into 60 minutes of 60 seconds each. Speed is calculated by how long it takes to travel a certain distance in terms of kilometers per hour. Fast ground vehicles can reach several hundred kilometers per hour. High speed atmospheric is over 1,000. When it comes to traveling in hyperspace, time is also used as a basis for calculating vast galactic distances based on the speed of light. A light year is a distance that light travels in a standard year, which amounts to approximately 9.5 trillion kilometers. I think that's a point. Either that or it's some of this background stuff is supposed to be stars. I think it's 9.5. An even greater distance is the parsec, which is a unit of distance equal to 3.26 light years, or roughly 30.5 trillion kilometers. Thus, Tatooine can be said to be somewhat less than a parsec away from Geonosis, the galaxy-wide coordinate grid used by starship navigators to record the location of star systems is based on a scale that measures 15 parsecs. So here is the time. So again, 60 seconds makes a minute, 60 minutes makes an hour, 24 hours in a day, 5 days in a week, 7 weeks in a month. So that's a bit different. So there's 35 days in a month, 35 days in a month, 368 days in a year. So there's the way that works out is you have 10 months, there's 3 festival weeks, so there's 15 days, and then 3 holidays in a year. And so the festival days and the holidays don't go against the normal calendar. And then you have, of course, 10 years of a decade, 100 years of a century, and 1,000 years of the millennium. Time dilation. And here's our behind the scenes here. In order for the characters in Star Wars to be able to travel back and forth across the galaxy, meeting characters who age at the same rate they do, the normal laws of physics have to be broken. In the real world, according to the theory of relativity, the time that elapses between two events will vary for observers who are moving relative to each other or are affected by different gravitational masses, a phenomenon known as time dilation. This has been proved to work even at fairly modest speeds, as clocks on satellites and space probes have gained or lost time slightly compared to identical reference clocks on Earth. Over greater distances, at greater speeds, and over longer periods, these effects become critical. For example, astronauts on a long mission would age less than those back at base, even though both would feel as if time is passing normally. This idea has been explored in science fiction movies many times, but notably in the original Planet of the Apes in 1968, where astronauts crash landed on an unknown planet after a long near-light speed voyage. Due to time dilation, the crew has aged only 18 months, even though they have landed almost 2,000 years in the future. Only towards the end of the movie does the sole surviving astronaut discover that this alien world, ruled by highly evolved apes, is actually Earth at 3978 after the apocalyptic nuclear war. Pretty cool. Imperial Shipping Regulations. So now we're going to talk about laws. Um, the need to understand the myriad of laws and regulations that govern trade and travel across the galaxy applies to those who seek to bypass those laws. Indeed, it's fair to say that smugglers need to know what's legal and what's not, even more than legitimate shipping businesses. Illegal or restricted goods can sell for a high price, but what classes as restricted cargo will change from system to system, while a little local knowledge could help. There's no point in getting down to the fine details without knowing the basics. So, yeah. And of course, the Imperial era, they kind of changed things. But essentially, under Imperial law, there were 5 basic levels of infractions that a freighter pilot, legitimate, and smuggler had to be aware of. A Class 5, the lowest level, covered the space-going equivalent of littering. Most of the time, but all but the most rule-obsessed Imperial would let these slide. If the guilty party was a regular offender, or if the Imperials were having a security clampdown, or if the official was pushing for a bribe, then a small fine would be levied, up to around a few hundred Imperial credits. A Class 5 infraction was for things like engine emissions, noise, and physical pollution, broken or insufficient landing lights, flying a ship without sufficient stocks of consumables, fuel, food, and etc. for the planned journey, insufficient escape pods to allow for all passengers and crew, and so on. Class 4 infringements meant operating without correct paperwork. This was a crime, if not a major one, and also an excellent way to make any customs official of any age pay serious attention to what else might be going on aboard a stopped vessel. It was also a quick way to a fine of between 1,000 and 5,000 credits. Relevant documentation include the operator's license and ship registration, not to mention paperwork for the cargo itself. Permit for transport of low-level restricted but not fully illegal goods were also carefully checked. What was classed as restricted was sadly something that could change quickly. A customs official determined to make a freighter captain's life difficult could randomly decide an item was restricted. Jogan fruit is normally fine, but Ranat are allergic to Jogan fruit brandy, which means that after a recent incident, Jogan fruit are now restricted. So, paying a small bribe was normally a way out of such incidents. Major felonies. Class 3 was where things got more serious. At this point, a fine was less likely than a captain losing their ship and their freedom. Heavily restricted items required very precise documentation. Such goods included medicines and narcotics, even the legal ones, and advanced technology. The Empire liked to maintain strict controls on such items, as doing so gave them control of a planetary population in times of local or system-wide conflict, and occasionally sector-wide issues. Control of anything that might be of benefit to an opponent became a major issue. Many a crew found themselves on the wrong end of a security situation they weren't aware of when setting out. As Class 3 infractions included any attempt to bribe an Imperial officer, the only way out was through the courts. If a Class 3 infraction could get a captain a few days to a month or so in prison, a Class 2 was likely to take that uh, to anything up to 30 standard years, as well as a very substantial fine and likely permanent loss of the impounded vessel. These infractions included being caught carrying outright illegal goods, such as military-grade weapons of any kind, either as cargo or as a component of a vessel. In other cases, smuggled items were, well, let me just kind of stop right there before we get in the next paragraph. So essentially, the Falcon had a lot of military grade weapons and sensors and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, Han was flying around just willy-nilly, ready to lose the Falcon at any point. In other words, smuggled items were any deemed not to be accompanied by the correct paperwork. Just having something in the cargo that hadn't been properly detailed on the manifest became as illegal as having it found being transported in a secret compartment. Defending oneself in the courts against a Class 2 charge was guaranteed to be expensive and time-consuming. Class 1 was the level that was as likely to get the offender shot down as it was to see them transported to the worst prison planets in the galaxy. Infractions included violent piracy, anything that could be classed as an attack on an Imperial facility, ship, boarding party, or any other personnel. These could have very broad interpretations. Conspiracy against the Empire or possession of any kind of cloaking device. Under Imperial law, few Class 1 offenders ever saw the inside of a courtroom. Justice was far more likely to be summary and swift, unless a show trial was thought to be desirable by way of discouraging others. Either way, the punishment for Class 1 infringement would be harsh and was likely to be terminal. And in our behind the scenes, the particulars of Imperial laws were first explored in intricate and exhaustive detail in the role-playing game books produced in the 80s and 90s by West End Games. Volumes such as Galaxy Guide 6, Tramp Faders, and Platt's Starport Guide gave players all they needed to know to follow in the footsteps of Han Solo and other smugglers. Some of those details, including characters and locations, even made it into the expanded universe. West End Games material continues to have an influence on the Star Wars galaxy even today. There you go. That is everything in this issue. Again, what we did, we added a couple pieces of framework and another rib. So we're about 3/4 of the way, a little over 3/4 of the way actually done. So that's pretty good. And then we also did some painting. So next issue, we're going to get a couple more pieces, another rib, the bracket for the rib, and another piece of plating. So that'll be in issue 62. All right, everybody, I want to thank you all for watching. Throw in some questions down below if you have any. Hopefully none of you guys are committing Class 1 felonies, because I like y'all. And with that, we'll say take care, and may the Force be with you always.